Imagine stepping into over 100 podcast studios, sometimes virtual, sometimes live. You see the smooth, organized workflows where everything just clicks. And you see the messy ones where nothing is ready, the guest feels lost, and opportunities slip away. Our guest today has lived this journey not once, but hundreds of times. And he's learned that the secret, it's not downloads, it's relationships. Let's discover how in today's episode of Behind the Workflow. Hello. Welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Workflow. My name is Simona Costantini.
I'm Tally Mello.
And our guest today is Greg Wasserman, who's the head of relationships at RSS.com. Greg spends his days connecting with podcasters, uncovering challenges, and building relationships that move the industry forward. He's been a guest on over 100 podcasts himself, giving him a front row seat into the systems and sometimes the lack of systems that shape a podcaster's workflow.
Before we dive in, this episode is powered by Northflow, the content planning platform built for podcasters and agencies who want more clarity and definitely less chaos. From episode plannings and guest assets and production tasks, it's all in one place so creators can focus on building relationships and, of course, great shows.
Let's get into today's conversation. Greg, welcome to Behind the Workflow. We are so happy to have you here today.
I'm so glad to be here.
It's going to be super fun. We love having conversations with people who are in the industry, tapping into all things workflow related, all things behind the workflow, whatever the workflow means to you. But first, before we go any further, before we dive any deeper, for listeners who may not know you yet, which would be very unfortunate for them, what does your role at RSS.com look like today? And can you give us a snapshot of your background in the podcast industry? Because we've all met each other before. We've known each other for a while, and you came from somewhere else before. Now you're doing all this cool stuff at RSS. So tell us a little bit about the journey.
Well, my background's in media sales, which then provides me a very unique perspective of the podcasting space because I've sold media. I literally spent the majority of my career being the person that everyone's, as a creator, is trying to be, along with these other roles that they're trying to fill, right? So I sold podcast advertising, so I understand a lot about that. Transitioned, and we look at the core of my last 4 years in podcasting. I ran 3 podcast listing platforms, Player FM, Breaker, and Podkicker, which really gave me an education because in that case, I was working with all the podcast hosting platforms and then working with creators. And the creators were anyone from big networks to solo podcasters, you name it. I network for a living. Like, this is how we all get to meet each other because that's literally what I do. I tell people I get to talk for a living. And then, as you said, we met because I was the head of relationships for Cast Magic, which is an AI content repurposing engine. And before coming here, and so to answer your question on the day-to-day at RSS.com, head of relationships, because I truly believe life is about time and relationships. And so the title is just perfect and fitting because you do not want me handling anything tech. I'm the person that handles everything talking. So when I first came over here, I've been here since April of 2025. So I set up a internal podcast Slack community for our creators. And then I get to go on podcasts. I get to find other tools that our podcasters would want so that we can work with them. Hence Northflow and our conversations that we've had. And then talk to anyone in the industry, whether you're hosting with RSS.com or you just work as a creator, as a network, whatever your role may be. I just want to talk because through conversations, we get to learn a lot and we get to figure out ways to support each other, which is what makes the podcast community incredible because we all just want to help each other. And as I tell everyone, no matter how similar your show and you are to another show, you're different because no one can be you. And that's truly what makes this all worth doing.
And I love that you came from like a media sales background. And a lot of our listeners, they're like agency owners. So I would love to get like, what's one lesson that agencies or like production agencies could actually use today based on the knowledge that you have from like media sales?
I mean, my platform, Greg, here is there's more than 20 plus ways to make money besides ads and sponsors. And if you're a network, most networks, most agencies are thinking, great, how do I become a media sales team or outsource that to someone? Because there's plenty of rep firms that do that work for you and they'll take a cut. But your job as a network is ultimately thinking not only how do you make your network money, but how do you help the podcasters in your network make money? And there's so many other ways you can do that that goes well beyond ads and sponsorships. So whether it's setting up live events, it's merch, it's courses, there's so many other ways that you could be thinking about it. And I push those agencies and networks to think, how do I help the people in my network not just make money by selling sponsorships, selling $30 CPM host read ads, but truly thinking, what else can I do? What can I bring to the table that will drive revenue beyond just those two mediums?
That's a really good point. And, not everyone always wants to make money off of their podcast, but I feel like, especially nowadays, a lot of shows that I see as a producer myself, even if the intention of the show isn't to sell a service or a business or what have you, there's still some kind of monetary component to it in that, people want to find ways to make money off their content. People want to find ways to, expand it in that way and turn it into a bigger brand. And you mentioned a lot about relationships before when you were introducing yourself. And I'm someone, and I know Tally is as well, and the whole Northflow team, that we also really value relationships because that is like the crux of all things. How do you think that podcasters and agency owners can leverage relationships in their own worlds to amplify their show, amplify their business, and just tap into the market even in even fuller way? And even more than that, what can those relationships do to open up possibly different doors and that kind of thing?
Ooh, your question. I love when the universe creates this timely question with what's going on in my real life, right? So
Oh, I
I had a
love that.
I had a conversation with an agency owner the other day, and the crux of your question was the answer I gave her. Her business is on the podcast guessing side, so her clients are majority guests of podcasts, and she helps them with the repurposing of that content. I'm like, well, there's an entire avenue that you could unlock for your business as a revenue, but also for your clients that you haven't touched on. And that is all the guests go on podcast. You are not responsible for helping the booking of them. You're there to help them with that repurposing. You've given them a strategy, work with them on that strategy, and you're repurposing. But why aren't you connecting with all those shows and going, my guest was on your show, and I've got other clients who would love to be a guest? Create that spreadsheet and figure out all the shows that your clients have been on and all the shows that your clients may want to be getting on, and think about, how can I now go into the business of guest booking where I don't want to be just a guest booker, but you can go and turn to your clients and say, hey, if I can get you on these shows, that's going to be an added fee. There's no guarantee, but I've already got clients that have gone on these shows, and therefore you've built relationships. So the core of that is, it's all about relationships. If you are already having these relationships and you're not leveraging them, not only to help your clients, but also for you as an agency to make more money, you're missing out. And so she's like, wow, I never even thought about that as an opportunity, because we ourselves are blinders on. And I love what I get to do in my career is, how do I take blinders off? How do I have the growth mindset for anyone to go, you're only thinking about the only way you can make money is through media, but there's other ways you can make money. So how do we take these blinders off? And that goes for an agency, that goes for an individual podcaster, that goes for any business person for that matter, is how do you maximize your time, your return, and the opportunities that you've got to support others, but also support yourself?
Tally has a really, really good question to follow up with this. I just want to sidebar comment because it's not a question, but I just want to sidebar comment to everything you just said, that when people don't leverage relationships, you have no idea anything that you could be missing out on in your orbit or in your awareness. You know what I mean? Like, it can be so, in some ways, siloed to work in production work because you kind of like work on your shows, you do your thing day in, day out, and that's what you do. But then when you don't step outside of the box and when you don't tap into new relationships, meet new people, make new connections, you can find yourself getting stuck. And so, anyways, I just wanted to kind of throw that in there as well as we dive more into like workflows and that kind of thing.
But that's so true because I did a LinkedIn comment on someone's post about this whole topic because I always laugh and I hear this and I tell this joke, but it's the audio engineer, background in audio who became a podcast agency because they create really good audio, but they never expanded their services to do the marketing side. And I always turn to that person going, look, you create incredible audio. Your shows sound amazing. 90% of the listeners probably don't understand the value of what you put into your engineering work, but you were missing out on revenue opportunities by not either offering those services, the marketing side of it, or partnering with the agency saying, you know what, I'm going to white label this. And you're able to work, say, Simona, I'm an amazing audio engineer, but I can also help you with the repurposing and the marketing side and the strategy and everything else. And I got a team that does that. And quote unquote, the team is someone that you're outsourcing to. Great. But at least you now are able to make more money, leverage those relationships, or at least create those relationships. But if you're just so focused on engineering of amazing audio that you never went and thought, what agencies can I partner with or should I network with that could offer me an additional services that I don't have the skill set or the desire or the time to learn, but I can learn from them by actually outsourcing. Like, those things just always boggle my mind, but it all comes back to relationships. Are we having them? Are we making those long-term connections? And that's why I say life is about time and relationships.
Yes. So just to kind of go with your being a guest, so you've been a guest on over 100 shows. What's like that experience overall like has taught you about like the good, the bad, and even like the ugly parts of like the whole podcast workflow and even like guest onboarding and so on?
It's funny in the regards that sometimes I think people treat me different and I don't get their full workflow. And I mean different is like, oh, you're already in the space. Great. Like, here, book this and we'll just chat and it'll be very casual. And I'm like, no, put me through the whole workflow because that is what I love about guesting is to see what your workflow is so I can come back to you and go, here are the holes in this entire scenario. At the same time, I think I'm being put through some people's full workflow. I'm like, you guys, this is terrible. Where are the assets? Why am I chasing you for the assets so that I can go promote you? As I tell most hosts, there's two reasons why guests don't promote you. One, you don't give them the assets. You don't make it easy for them to promote you. You say, hey, here's a clip. Here's the episode's live. Please go promote it. I'm sorry. I'll use this show as an example. We're recording on day X. I don't know when this will go live, but I guarantee you between X and that Y date of live, I don't remember what I said, what we talked about. I'm struggling just to remember what I did yesterday. So, how am I going to remember what I talked about on your show? So, if you're only giving me a show's live, I would love for you to promote it. I already gave you guys the pre-call. Let's talk about that, right? Every podcast should have a pre-call so you can work out the kinks, understand what we're talking about, get a vibe because no listener wants to turn into a show that's like we're just feeling like they're getting to know each other. That's a terrible situation. So have the pre-call, you do the recording. Great. Now where are my assets to promote this? Make it easy for me. Write that. Use AI. Once again, my previous company, how we've known each other is Cast Magic. I literally take the recording, throw it in there. I've got my prompts already created for me. Amazing. Now I've got my assets that if you didn't give to me, which I urged the host to go ahead and do. If not, I'm going to go do it myself because I know that. But if you can figure out from a host standpoint the workflow, from the onboarding. What does the onboarding look like to bring me in as a guest? What is the experience thereafter? If you're sending 1,000 emails, which some hosts do, they send me so many emails. I'm like, you guys, I'm lost. Too many emails on just your show, and I got my day-to-day life I've got to try and deal with. Make it simple, make it easy. I understand maybe you've been burned too much that your onboarding flow is, we record on this platform and these are your best practices and X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, I get it. Make it simple. Make it easier for your guest, because you don't want to overwhelm them. Even if they've been a guest like myself many times, it's got to be simple. It's got to be connected. There's got to be a through line. And then the last thing is, don't try and sell me. Like, that is the other thing. You see, I get added to the newsletter of the host. So now I'm getting confused and I start deleting things because I'm getting your email about trying to sell me whatever your services are or whatever your newsletter content is. And I'm trying to figure out, where's the email about me being a guest? Because that's what I care about right now. Everything else you're sending me, I can't pay attention to it. I shouldn't be paying attention to it. So all those things I see in the host experience.
So do
I
you?
have so many thoughts.
Yeah, I
Go ahead,
know.
Tally.
Oh goodness, I could go.
I'm like, you've hit 75 things nail on the head. Like, go ahead, Tally. I'll follow up
Hold
after.
on. Yes, I know. I have a few things too. Like, so part of our own template here in Northflow for our show for Behind the Workflow is that one of the tasks that we have there is to send out all of the assets to our guests. So whenever we're done and Simona's team is done editing and they'll create the clips and everything, we have one task that's specifically for that, to just to make sure that we won't forget that step. And I do remember one time that I didn't do that, and the guest did follow up like, hey, what day is it supposed to go live? So we made sure that it's part of our template. Now, you mentioned another thing too, like getting them into like, I guess like putting the guest into their own newsletter. So when do you think it would be the right time for that? Or you don't think guests that are part of your show should ever be part of the newsletter unless they opt into it? So I'm curious. And then I'm sure Simona probably has more questions and comments on your original answer too.
Newsletter. Okay. After my recording, after we've already gone through, because I coach podcasters that the way to use your podcast as a business is a business development and therefore a content engine. So you're bringing a guest on that you ideally would love to be able to work with, whether it's partner with or bringing them on as an actual client. And by having a podcast, you allow yourself to do that and create a relationship. But if my experience is I have that pre-call, and before we actually do a recording, I'm getting bombarded with all of your sales material. Now this feels not like a relationship. I'm going to ignore, I have even more reason to ignore your newsletters and your emails because it comes off too salesy. And I don't want, as the host who's trying to bring someone in to build a relationship, I should not be trying to sell them or introduce them to my product and services before I've actually established a relationship. Otherwise, why are you even bringing them on as a guest in the first place? You should have just tried selling them. And right now you've put them into a funnel where you feels like you are trying to sell them, and that shouldn't be the purpose. It's relationship building. So it was not until I've actually done this recording that I should be then added into the, I guess, your workflow, but I should also be added to a completely different workflow, especially if your newsletter is incredibly salesy. That's,
So
I guess,
true.
my thought on it.
That's a really good point. I have a couple of additional thoughts on this too, because so let's take, for example, Northflow as a product. Okay. So if you opt in to test, or, not to test, sorry, but if you opt in to create an account with Northflow, then you automatically get put on our newsletter for those specific things. We're not overly salesy though. Like we You have an onboarding sequence that you'll go through, of course, because we want you to like understand and like know how to use the product, right? But other than that, you're getting product update emails and right now, our weekly podcast episode that goes out, which is more value focused than anything else. But that's because you opt in to try the product, right?
Right, exactly.
Totally different, right? Totally different than if you're being a guest on a show and then someone just loops you into their email sequence or like their weekly emails with no additional context. I'm actually not a fan of adding podcast guests to my newsletter without people opting in because it's a little bit different too though. Like I live in Canada, so we have pretty serious laws around email marketing and like just adding people to your list and that kind of stuff. Like you can't do it. Like it's very regulated to do that. Like you can't just add people to your list. So I'm always of the mindset of like, if that person hasn't opted in, then I'm not going to give them all of the emails, even if I think it's going to be valuable for them. So anyway, so there's like that kind of perspective too. But going back to everything that you were talking about before, I want to talk about two parts. So you said, you were saying something and I immediately thought to myself like, oh my gosh, how many times have I been a guest on a podcast and the podcast host has asked me, what do I want to talk about? And I'm like, you're inviting me on your show. You should be kind of giving me what do you want me to talk about? Like, of course, like there's specific things that you can talk about, but like, where are we going with the conversation? I feel like that is like the host's job to find, like you said, the through line in the conversation and like the story arc of the conversation. It's not the guest's job to position what the conversation is going to be. Now, if there's things that you don't want to talk about or things that you don't want to touch on, totally different story. But that's just my own opinion. What do you think about that? No?
I mean, I'll push back. Yeah, I'll push
Okay.
back. There's a duality and a dance between the host and the guest, right? We both have our own agenda. It depends on, for me, what is my agenda by coming on your podcast? Part of it is I'm here to support you guys. Like that is who I am as a guest, because the services I have to offer is myself as a consultant in the podcast space, and just being able to go and say, anyone that's listening to this, please, by all means, reach out to me. I just love talking to anyone. It's truly what I do. Once again, I network for a living. And the other side, of course, they're like, how do I support my employer here, RSS.com, and the conversations around that? But I'm still going to turn to you guys and go, what would your audience find valuable? What is it that you guys want to talk about, so that I can position myself in that way that an audience, whoever you guys are that are listening to this, as you said, are agency owners, great that you are all walking away with the knowledge that's relevant for them. That also supports, so that's your agenda and my agenda. But there's a lot of us in the guesting world that will come on a podcast and I'm trying to sell my book, my course, whatever it is I'm trying to do. I've got my agenda. That's why I'm being a guest. I'm being brought on as a guest because my agenda is to get access to your audience so I can go ahead and offer whatever my services, my digital products, whatever that may be. And we both have to figure out how is what my agenda is to come on your show, also providing valuable insights, conversation to anyone that's listening. Otherwise, and I was talking to someone yesterday about this, I've been on a guest on someone's show, and it felt like every time I said something, they interjected with kind of a way they could sell themselves. And so it became, I am a guest. You are bringing me as a guest in your show because you need to have content so you can have ultimately a place to sell yourself. That to me feels really wrong because it's a terrible experience. I now don't want to promote me as a guest on your show because I don't want anyone to listen, because anyone that's going to be listening is going to be like, this guy was just trying to sell me the whole time. I'm like, that's how I felt, right? So there's a huge dance of a guest and a host, and providing at the end of the day, the value to the listener. That's
Yes.
all this conversation truly be for. What is the value that the listener or the audience, because I love repurposing content, what is the audience getting away with what we're talking about or sharing? Otherwise,
100%.
it's our own agenda, and they're not going to
Exactly.
listen.
So to add on to that, because I want to like clarify just a tiny little bit, when I was saying before, it was like, I remember a couple podcasts I've been a guest, like invited a guest on, and they didn't have anything like prepped. It was on me to provide the guidance of the whole conversation. So there wasn't that dance between the two, you know what I mean? And so I was like, well, that's so strange. Like, you want me to come on your podcast. You obviously want me to come on for a reason. Like, what is that reason? You know, like, what do you want me to bring to your audience? Like, what do you want me to talk about? Because I could talk about anything in the podcasting world. I can talk about anything in the self-help and development world. What is that specific thing that you want me to talk about? So it makes me kind of think too, because when part of like your onboarding like flow, or like your guest onboarding flow, for example, could be that you have an intake form. If you don't have an intake form, maybe you should click the button in the episode notes below where it says northflow.io and create your account so you can create an onboard a guest form for your guests. But anyways, having that said, in that form, you can also add in different sections where you get that kind of information from your guests. So for example, I have another podcast in addition to this one called As It Relates to Podcasting. And on that show, I'll ask people, like, what are 3 topics that you really want to hit on, or like 3 things that are really important for you to talk about? And then that helps me formulate, where's this conversation going to go? What are we going to talk about? What do they want to share about? So I think, like, exactly like you said, it's that dance between the two, but there's also ways that you can do it preemptively in advance without, having to chase down your guests being like, so what are we talking about? So what are we talking about? So what are we talking about? It's like, but you should also know that, Does that make sense?
100% comes back to your why and strategy. And I think that is this conversation or our products alone, RSS.com and Northflow, it's ultimately anyone that's listening. Your job is to have a system and strategy in place. And that is covering so many different aspects, from the what is my system and strategy in place of why am I running my business? How do I want to run my business? How am I onboarding customers? How am I doing the guest? How am I doing the host? What's the why of that show? What is the takeaway that I want my audience to understand? And do I know my audience? I had a conversation recently and they were explaining they have 2 different shows. One is a very long show. I think it's like 90 minutes. One is a 30-minute show, because the audience for both of those shows one is females on the go that need quick hits and they want the answer right away. Another is like, we can talk and like people will just sit there and absorb how a natural conversation goes. Do you know who your audience is? Like, all these things come back to strategy. And I think that is a big piece in terms of what makes a good show, what makes a successful show, what makes a good experience, not only for the host, the producer, if it's all in one and the same, the guest, and also the audience.
Yes, definitely. That full guest experience, I feel like it can make or break any shows for sure. So going back into your experience with all of these shows that you've been part of, what's like one system that stood out as making everything smooth? Or what's one system that actually failed and that you still remember that was just a horrible experience as a guest?
I mean, the quintessential fail is I have to chase down to figure out that this show went live. I'm like, hold on. I didn't even get an email to let me know my episode went live. You want me to repurpose? You want me to know?
That
You
really
brought me on.
scarred
You
you,
want me
huh?
to repurpose? Like, what? How's this going to happen? Right?
Yeah.
So that I think is the quintessential. Hold on, I never got even a follow up that this episode is live. What am I? And you then giving me assets. I've got to go search for the assets, or I got to track you down. Assets is a big one. I'll get a lot of hosts that will send me, here's a clip, but they won't send me a thumbnail. And I'm like, do you guys even do episode thumbnails? If not, and you've got a guest host podcast, talking head show, why aren't you providing that? Remember, we want to make your guest have a great experience, that they want to go ahead and promote this. If I'm doing your cover art as the promotion, where's my face? Remember, like, I'm being on your show so that I can promote me, so it's not just me promoting you. If that's not there, we're missing a big piece. So I'd say those are the big components in terms of what fails. The successes or what have been good experiences. There's a natural onboarding experience where, hey, Greg, here's the link to book the time. Great. Here's the form. that I would love for you to fill out. Here's the places that I would love for you to upload your assets so that I've got your headshots, your bio, whatever it is in your intake. Great. Now you've given me a system. You then automatically are able to send me a link. So it comes in my calendar with the recording link, because that's always a fun one. I've had many occasions where time to log in and I go to the calendar link and I'm like, there's nothing there. Oh, sent in another email. I'm like, if I've got to go figure out where this email is and it's not already built into my calendar, so I can just click and then come into whatever your recording studios, that's a terrible experience. It's a terrible workflow. So yeah, I'd say those are the
I'm
bookends
guilty of
on
that.
the answer.
I'm guilty of doing that because so for all the podcasts that I do, I record it on Descript. And in the past, I used to use Riverside. And then when I started doing all of our editing and production work and all that stuff in Descript, I'm like, well, it just makes sense to record it in here because I don't do as many guest interviews overall as I used to when I was using Riverside. And one of the things that I haven't really been able to figure out fully is how to reuse the same link in Descript over and over and over again and have it go to the place that I need it to go. Because I send this episode. So for example, the link that I created for this episode goes directly into my editor's Descript in the exact folder that she knows exactly where to find it. When I've done it the opposite way of just being like, here's the generic link, let's use it, I have to then go and find the episode afterwards. And it's named something totally different. It's named the date that it was recorded. And so from that process point of view, it's Descript doesn't necessarily make it easy to reuse that same link over and over again. But then it can be frustrating for the guest as well. But then I don't want to lose the recording. You know what I mean? So then in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm just going to send it off before the recording because I want to make sure that I have the correct link and I'm sending people to the right place. Because I've had client shows where we've even used Riverside FM, sent them to the specific studio, and they'll go into the studio and then no one's there. You know what I mean? And it's the correct link, but nobody's there. And so sometimes I find I've experienced so many tech issues when it comes to that I'm like, okay, how can I control this in the best possible way? But you're right. It does create frustration because then you got to go and find the thing or find the link somewhere else. So
I'm wondering too, Simona, in our own workflow, that is definitely something that we should improve. So instead of sending an email, maybe we could actually edit the invite and update the link there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It makes
you guys are guilty. You guys are guilty of this experience because I literally, while we're talking, I just opened up my calendar. I'm like, oh, there's a link for this to Google Meets.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not the right place. But
you guys then sent, which is not the right place. So had I...
Don't go there.
Guilty.
Once again, everyone that's listening has to be in a similar boat to me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we're starting this recording at X time doesn't mean I'm checking my email. I may have been on back-to-backs. I'm smart enough, or at least 90% of the time I'm smart enough to block at least a half hour, 15 minutes before recording so I can prepare, mentally get there, set up my studio and whatever it is that I need to do. But there's been times where I screw that up and I'm like, oh, whoa, I'm going straight from a meeting into a recording. I don't got time to go back to my email. I'm expecting all right, go to my calendar invite. Or go to my calendar, 100%. Click on it, and go to it. So had I not had the time beforehand and seen your email come through with the script link here, yeah, that would have been a frustration.
Exactly, because then you kind of go back and you're like, well, where am I going? Why is nobody here? And I totally get that. And so it kind of begs the point too of the tech that you're using has to work also, because you can have the workflow, you can have everything set up properly, you can have all of the steps, but I don't know about you, Greg, but on the production side, I have been on the end of tech failing on a daily basis. The link doesn't work, the camera doesn't work, the mic doesn't work, the Wi-Fi's gone. I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, okay, but it's there's always something, you know what I mean? So I feel in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, let me mitigate the risk by just doing it this way. But then the problem or the challenge when you do it this specific way is it stops you from thinking about what does that experience look like for somebody else and what kind of frustration could that cause for them as well. So it's a really, really good reminder. And I honestly need to figure out how to get that Descript link to just go exactly where I want it to go so that I don't have to have that issue and everyone gets the correct link and everyone just gets to go into the studio and has like, a fantastic time and so on. But I think it's a good reminder too that like some things are very much in your control to fix and then some things are totally not. Some tech things are just really not in your control and it just is what it is,
Not knowing, I mean, I'm just starting to familiarize myself with Northflow, but is there a task that you're able to put in Northflow of going, all right, 24 hours before the recording with whatever the guest, the task is update calendar invite with the recording link, and therefore I've got me as the guest has 24 hours, which most likely the invite's automatically updating, so there's nothing I need to do or accept. It's just going to say invites updated with a new link. Great.
Exactly.
So it's all just a Northflow workflow piece that you just have to figure out and tell yourself, this is something I have to do. But there's so many of those little moments where if a person doesn't have a workflow or is not using a Northflow as their project management tool, that are all falling through the cracks and they haven't figured out how do I solve for that or remind themselves this is what I need to do. And as I think you touched on perfectly, what is good for you as the host and the producer and the entity on that side versus what is the guest experience and how do I remember we want to make the best guest experience as well as produce the best content for our audience, especially if you're using it as a business development tool where this is how I operate and you're now getting to see while I'm not a podcast pro, but and my core business is not that, I want you to understand I think about every detail. I think about the customer experience. I think about all these things, not only on my podcast, but also in my business. And this is why you should do business with me.
Exactly. So if you were to list out, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you were to give our listener one full tangible workflow for guest booking, I'm going to say onboarding, but for guest booking, what would all of your favorite steps be if you could design it from A to Z?
A easy system that sends them a calendar link so they can book. Part of that then is either your next flow or included in that would be here's the intake form with the questions that I would love for you to answer, the information I need to gather, like you guys did, any open questions that I could be able to fill in with additional information, the ability to add an image, because nothing's more confusing than here's an email, fill out this form, and then please respond to this email and send me your headshots. The next thing is providing guidance on what the recording's going to be. Too often, I'll get that email right after I've submitted, but we're not recording for a while. So you've just educated me on something that I'm not going to need for however long that may be. So I should be getting that information maybe a couple days before and then making sure that I've got the link so I know where I'm going. Any questions? And then, of course, the follow up piece. Hey, your episode's going to be going live here. Thanks for being a guest. And of course, what those assets are going to look like. Or better yet, provide as a host what the gas sets are going to be so that your guest preemptively can say, hey, thanks for letting me know what you're going to create. Legit, not just we create these assets as a high level. It's like, no, I'm going to create 3 clips for you. I'm going to create 2 images. Tell me the actual assets so I can go back with you and say, this is what I need. Or you can send them an example when you say, here's an example of 3 assets I've sent for other clients. If these don't work for you, know that it's going to be the clips are going to be specific for your show, but at least you can understand how it looks, what the headshot our artwork looks like, whatever it may be, the quote cards, whatever you're creating, give me as the guest. Oh, because I've gone back to my host and saying, is there any way you can remove this? Or is there any way you can make this adjustment? We can preemptively do that so that you're not, when you're sending those assets to me, going like, oh, I've already had my graphic design, or I've already worked on this. You already know what changes I may be asking for, which helps both of us in many regards. So there's so many things that we can do as a host to make this a better experience for ourselves and the guest.
That's a really, really good point. And I think too, especially on like the marketing side of it, I always try and keep things as easy as possible, especially for the guest, because the truth of the matter is like, I mean, you're a fantastic guest. You want to do all of the things. You're like, yep, let me promote the episode. Like, let's talk about it. Let's do all that. Most guests are not like you. Most guests don't want to share the episode. Most guests don't really promote anything. They don't, go back and so on. So one of the things that I like to do is create assets that are neutral enough that they can show up on both feeds. So I'll take Instagram, for example, because we were talking about like reel covers, for example. So some people will create reel covers in like the branding of the person if you have all the colors and all of that stuff, which is awesome. What we do for Behind the Workflow, we create a clip and all of the graphics always have everyone's face on it, or it has like a shot of just the guest who, the person who's the guest. And then we collaborate with them because it's easier, right? We'll post our post, you accept the collaboration, it's on both feeds. It's easier for you to share about it. You can see what the clip is about, which you would have received in advance anyways. And then you can talk a little bit about it. You know what I mean? Same thing for LinkedIn, for example. So we try and create the graphics, just within my agency and for this show specifically, so that they're versatile enough that you can use them on both sides so that it doesn't actually add more work into your already busy and chaotic life and like schedule. And then it becomes easier to promote the podcast episode and not have to, for you to have to go back and like create up a whole bunch of stuff if you don't have the time. So anyways, there's so many different ways that you can do it, but let's shift as we come to a close. Let's shift into programmatic ads. So we haven't talked a lot about this so far, but RSS.com, and we want to highlight this, recently rolled out programmatic ads for podcasters overall. So now if you're a podcaster or you're an agency owner, what's the best way that you would recommend for them to educate clients about programmatic ads? What is it? Why does it matter? And why should they consider opting into it?
Good question. There's so many different ways to think about programmatic and just advertising as a whole. So what RSS.com, our first iteration into podcast advertising monetization from an ad standpoint, is what we call paid. And that is then, in a sense, the way to turn on, think about radio commercials into your podcast, whether it's a pre-roll, a post-roll, or either an automatic or manual inserted mid-roll. And you can choose wherever those may be or have it automatically. I've got a lot of creators and podcasters that are saying, I'm still trying to grow my audience. I don't know if I want to turn on programmatic ads because the three of us here are all in 3 different geos, 3 different backgrounds, 2 different genders. I know, I'm getting confused myself, right?
You know what?
We're
Fine.
we're 3 different people. And therefore, we're going to get targeted differently.
Yes.
And so the ads the 3 of us will all receive will be most likely different. We're all not going to receive a McDonald's ad unless McDonald's wants all 3 of us and they are spending a boatload of money to make sure that they are getting there. And I just use this as an example. What we find is great if you're worried about turning on ads because you are building your audience and you don't want the first thing they hear is an ad, then do the post roll. You can still start making money. You can do a mid roll, but if you're so concerned about I can't place this ad where I want it, or I don't know what this ad's going to be, because that's the big thing about programmatic in this regard, is it's not I get to choose the ad. It's not a dynamically inserted ad of my choosing to target people. It's in a sense a blind based on whatever categories you say I do or don't want, but the targeting is going to come down to the individual level of RIP of what the advertiser is able to understand about who those listeners are. But you should go ahead and turn on the post roll because it's at the end of the show. They've already listened, or assuming they've listened to 100% of your show. You're looking at your analytics and saying, all right, most of my listeners are only getting through 60%. Well, if they're only getting through 60% of your show, definitely turn on your post roll and at least make something in that regards. But why are you only getting through 60%? So your analytics are helping you in that regards. But I think that's what makes RSS.com is unique and what I love about it. is every podcaster is trying to figure out how to monetize. 3 questions I always got to ask or came to realize podcasters care about is how do I get more distribution? How do I grow my audience? And how do I monetize? And the humor of this is they kind of, and this is why I have to use these 3 fingers, because it's like, you want to make money? Well, then you've got to grow your audience. How do you grow your audience? Have more distribution. So with RSS.com, you use our platform. We'll distribute you to as many platforms that are out there versus others that are like, I want to keep you inside the ecosystem here. You want to grow your audience. We talked about repurposing and big there and monetization. Great. You can turn on the ads. You can start making money at just 10 downloads. And we'll give you a 70-30 split, meaning 70% from the revenue that you're earning is going back to you, whereas other platforms are 50-50 split. So we want to give as much control, creation, and revenue to the creator. So if you're an agency listening to this or an individual creator, I would definitely go ahead and look at that as an option. And then if we add another component, most podcasts don't have a 100% fill rate. Meaning, if I've decided to I want 7 ads, or I think now the industry average is 8 ads in an episode, which is absurd, but everyone's trying to make more and more money. So if you aren't able to sell every ad unit to every show that you've got, why wouldn't you go ahead and at least try and fill some of that with a lower CPM? User experience is a little different, but you're able to make money. That's what every podcaster goes back to 3 questions. They want to figure out how do they make more money. Well, grow your audience, put out good content, and then turn on the ads and then start selling. Goes back to my background as in media sales. Think about most podcasters, even an agency itself, right? Simona, like you're trying to help your creators produce, edit, strategy, storytelling, all those things. Unless your background is also in media sales or you're hiring someone on your team that's going to go out there, I'm going to go hustle for RFPs. I'm going to go hustle for it goes back to relationships. How do I win an RFP? Everyone and their mother is trying to get an RFP and trying to get on a plan. What's going to make you different than someone else? Well, my show is amazing. Your show may be amazing, but you still have to have the right relationship because there's so much inventory out there. Why are they going to buy from you? So that's where the programmatic piece comes in. Like, I can just flip a switch and be able to get it without having to worry about trying to sell and being what I've done most of my career.
Amazing. I love that. And also too, like just the overall listener experience is so important, right? And so you want to make sure that whatever you're doing on your podcast aligns to your goals, especially of monetization. And you also want to have it be a good experience for your listener. If you're thinking of 8 ads in one podcast episode, that's a lot of ads, right? So like you were saying at the beginning, of this segment specifically, how are you positioning them so that you continue to keep the listener experience in mind while also hitting your own goals? But it's kind of this cycle, right? Because it continues to open your eyes to different things. So like you said, if your completion rate isn't 100%, why is it, right? Where are people dropping off? Why are they dropping off? What are they listening to? What part of the conversation makes them stop? Then it helps you understand, well, maybe it's their listener habit. Where are they listening in from, right? Are they on a commute that's only 30 minutes and your episode is 50? And maybe they don't pick it back up at the end afterwards, right? So there's so many different things that you can start to test. Completion rate paired with your overall listenership and just everything. So it's like a whole cycle. But as we wrap up our conversation today, we always like to pull in some key takeaways for our audience today. So I have 4 of them, and I want you to add anything that you think I may be missing, okay? So the first one is your guest experience is everything. It's key, and to really focus in on how are you creating the best guest experience and overall process, which takes me to my second point, which is investing in your workflow. So making sure that you're taking the time to either try out a tool like Northflow to help you create that workflow, and or look at a workflow that you may already have existing and see where you can optimize it. But if you ever have questions about that, you can always contact us because that's what we love to do. And the third one is building on relationships and making sure that you're prioritizing those relationships. And the last one is if you want to grow and monetize your show, head on over to rss.com because you can learn how to do that there. Anything else you'd add to that, Greg?
It comes back to strategy. I liked your first point into the second bullet, right? It's creating a great guest experience and then having a workflow that kind of sets that. But it's a strategy. And I think that's what most don't understand, because we're going down the record, edit, release strategy, and then I've got to do it again and do it again. And that's why pod fade comes in, because like this is overwhelming and it feels like work. But if you actually have systems in place for yourself, or you're thinking further enough ahead, which most aren't doing, that you can go back to that system. Because I have to imagine behind the workflow podcast here, you're going to aggregate a end of the year. What were the key learnings? And so you're now being able to go into a workflow and go, what were the 4 things that I wrote down on each show? And then in my spreadsheet, in your workflow, whatever it may be, going like, all right, I want these little clips. And you're already starting to segment those things so that you've got at the end of the year the perfect recap of our year, which most people aren't doing, but that's a great way to bring people back in.
It is. That's a really, really great. Those are some of my favorite episodes to create. On one of my other podcasts that I host, it's called Happiness Happens. I always ask them one final question at the end of like how to create more happiness in your day, every day starting today. That's literally, I've been asking it for like 5 years. I'm like, or 6 years maybe now at this point. I've like, it's memorized. But those are always so fun because at the end of the year, I usually do like 2 episodes that'll run those key segments. And it's so fun because here's your like dose of inspiration and something you can actually take and implement into your life right away. And you can go back and listen to the full episode if you want to, right? So that's fantastic. Greg, thank you so much for being our guest today. This was so much fun and I love chatting with you.
Likewise. Thank you guys for having me on. Thank you everyone that stayed and listened and tuned in. And even if you didn't listen, all the little repurposable pieces that are out there, because that's the whole piece of this, is not everyone's going to listen. But thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share. And as I've said, I live on LinkedIn. Please find me there. I love to talk. It's all about relationships. I have no clue where one conversation is going to go. Would never imagine that conversation, a couple of years ago would lead us to where we are today. And it's been exciting to watch what Northflow continues to build. So thank you guys once again.
Thank you. Thank you for being this journey with us. And, Greg is the guy you want to know. So follow up and look him up on LinkedIn for sure. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of Behind the Workflow. And we will see you same time, same place next week. Bye for now.